My name is Andrea. I will be your moderator this evening. With me, I have Bima, who will be introducing himself momentarily, and we make up just a very small part of this Inspira Advantage team. Tonight's discussion is everything we need to know about med school admissions. We have a lot to cover. Just before we go into that, a couple of sort of housekeeping rules, so to speak. This webinar is recorded, and you will receive a recording in your inbox within a day or two. So we're really excited. We want to make sure that if you do have to pop out early, or you get busy, or you'd like to add to your notes, or maybe follow up, that we make that accessible to you as well. We're looking at running this webinar for an hour. We always love to leave room towards the end for a Q&A. So definitely you've used the chat function to just get your questions in, and then people will be able to answer them as we go through. So what are we talking about? What are we learning about? So we'll be speaking about the key steps in the admissions process, what admissions committees are looking for. We'll be speaking about the personal statement and interview tips, common pitfalls to avoid, and that Q&A that we mentioned. Bima, do you want to introduce yourself real quickly before we get going? And then we will be able to introduce yourselves as well.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. My name is Bima. I am a general surgery resident at UC Irvine, University of California, Irvine. I essentially did my undergrad medical school and now surgery residency at UC Irvine. I heard that y'all are from the Midwest, so I do have some Midwest roots. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and spent a year there, or sorry, 2 years there actually, doing research at the University of Pittsburgh. And most recently, I just came out of a 2-year research fellowship stint funded by the NIH's T32 program from Northwestern. So I heard California is a little bit warmer than the Midwest right now, which I'm grateful for, but hopefully we can I can help you guys out in your medical school journeys.
So before we just get into the nitty gritty, I just want to take a moment to introduce who we are as a whole, right? There's a lot of new faces. You may not have heard of us. As mentioned, we're Inspira Advantage. We are actually a globally recognized admissions consulting and test prep firm with over 16 years experience. We specialize in helping students gain admission to top graduate healthcare programs, including medicine, all with a 98% acceptance rate. We believe in starting early, which is why we offer pre-health advising for college freshmen. Our team really does help students sort of build a tailored academic timeline, including course selection and GPA strategy, find impactful experiences like shadowing, researching, clinical and non-clinical volunteering, extracurriculars, leadership roles. And then we move into helping build a strong and standout profile. So making sure that your undergraduate experiences check all the boxes that top medical schools are looking for. What this does, it lays a strong foundation, helping to differentiate applicants and make them leave a lasting impression. In addition, we have tutors who provide personalized one-on-one test prep for the MCAT, DAT, and the GRE. We begin with diagnostic tests, then we move into custom study plans, interim progress tracking, and then students do typically see a score increase of 15 points on the MCAT. Our 48-hour and then our 60-hour programs even hold score guarantees of 515 on the MCAT, 21 on the DAT, and then 320 on the GRE. When it's said and done, it's time to apply. We have something called an all-inclusive application program, which offers unlimited support through the entire application cycle. So this is everything from creating a personalized school list and narrative to perfecting your personal statement and secondaries with unlimited edits, providing interview prep, scholarship guidance, and waitlist strategy. We're very much by our students' side until they receive their acceptance. So really our goal is clear. It's very simple. It's to create the most competitive candidates and applications, ensuring our students shine in this competitive admissions landscape. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about us or you have additional questions, we want to make sure that this group of individuals knows that we do offer personalized consultations via video, phone, or email. So no matter where you are in the process and even after this webinar, if you have those kind of questions, we want to make sure that we're there to support you and sort of assist you along this process, because we know it's not easy to do it alone. Just one quick note, I know on screen it says 94% acceptance rate. It is now a 98% acceptance rate, and something we are incredibly proud of. But I just wanted to point that out. Fima, it's back to you.
Awesome. Alrighty. So getting to the nitty gritty of med school applications. And so the med school application process is honestly a bit of a beast to go through. A lot of it is administrative, but it has so many different aspects of it. There's your numbers, kind of elucidating why you want to be a doctor can be hard sometimes, even though you feel it in your core. But all of these things take time. So the admissions timeline is a marathon. It takes over a year initially and starts in June 1st, all the way up until essentially white coat ceremony. I've heard from my mentees of folks getting off of the wait list as late as the day before white coat ceremony. So it really does take 365 days of the year. With that being said, even though the application process for the medical schools start in June 1st, the preparation has to start months and months beforehand, and starts before even the application portal opens. And so that is usually where the biggest costly mistake is for most applicants. Just like running a marathon, you're not going to show up on race day expecting to run 26.2 miles. All of these things take months and months of preparation from before that goes into deciding when you should take the MCAT for the first time. Most people on average take the MCAT twice. So maybe you'd have to kind of allot for a second MCAT score to come in. And so the biggest, I think, barrier is kind of respecting the timeline and how much it really takes to even get to the starting line, and let alone cross the finish line. Alrighty. So the preparation process has different phases. Really, from the application standpoint, for medical schools, they will receive all of your application materials all at once. But from the applicant, usually the first thing that comes first is your transcripts. This accrues from the first day that you start your undergrad. Maybe you're also able to rack up some credits from your AP classes from high schools. So that also counts. Then the next is usually your MCAT score, and kind of in the background is also your volunteering and preparing yourself for what you're going to write in your extracurricular activities. After that, after the MCAT score is done and you're preparing your materials to graduate, then you'll have your primary applications, which will open on June 1st. And then after that is the secondaries, which is a specific application for each school that you apply to. After that, it'll be the interviews. And luckily, that is really the last stage of the application process that you have control over. Because after that, that's when the selection committee kind of gets together and makes their decisions based off of your application as a whole and your interview experience. The important thing to realize is that each step really builds on the previous step of the application process, which means that the earlier that you're able to strategize and create a good core and base for yourself to fundamentally build off of, that is going to create a strong application. So just like baking a cake, the least important part is probably the icing that you put on last towards the structure of the cake. The cake itself, needs to stand on its own and be delicious and not just crumble over the icing once you put it on. So anything that feels rushed or unprepared will definitely shine through. And what here in Inspiro, or at least what I try to do with my mentees, is kind of build that foundation, that strong foundation from the beginning. Alrighty. So talking a little bit more specifically on the MCAT. So I mentioned previously that the average applicant usually takes the MCAT twice, which kind of is already a testament towards how big of a hurdle the MCAT can be. And so there's I truly believe that the MCAT, as all standardized tests, is really a measure of just how well you can take the test, which means that, unfortunately, no matter how well you do in your undergrad classes, that may not necessarily translate into a good MCAT score. For those of you who may not be as familiar with the MCAT, so the MCAT, the way it's structured is it will definitely demand that you come in with fundamental scientific and social science knowledge. But what they'll do essentially is present a paragraph for you to read with new information, and it is your job to synthesize that information with the existing knowledge that you have to answer the questions. And so there are definitely some questions that are standalone that you can answer with just the knowledge that you learn in your undergrad classes. But the real challenge of what makes the MCAT such a beast of a test is the fact that you have to synthesize that new information on the fly. And it's just like seeing when you're a doctor, and when I see my patients, they come in with their different slew of symptoms, and ultimately it'll be your job in the future to synthesize the information, filter out what's important, what's not, and incorporate that with your previous training to come up with the best treatment option. So quality study time is definitely going to be important. Hours of active learning, practicing the exam format by sitting in full-length exams, and targeting your weaknesses are going to be important in optimizing your MCAT score. So the second point here, timing of your test date, is also going to be important. Taking the MCAT too early before you have a good fundamental base of scientific knowledge from your undergrad classes is going to be not great. But also taking the MCAT too far away from the classes that you've taken in the past can also not be as great either. So kind of having that balance of taking a score where you're predicting yourself to peak at the right time is going to be key in getting the best score that you're able to get. Alrighty. So as you all probably know, GPA and the MCAT score can open doors, but it definitely doesn't mean that you're going to get an interview for sure, or let alone get an acceptance into a medical school. The GPA and MCAT score, just for me sitting in on the admissions committees at UCI's School of Medicine and now general surgery residency applications, these numbers are usually used as like a filtering mechanism. unfortunately, we would love to give every single person a chance, but reviewing 10,000 applicants is simply sometimes impossible in a 24-hour day, and spread over a small selection committee of folks who decide whether to give interviews or not. And so the GPAs and MCAT scores, even though it's kind of tough, is it can be unfair sometimes depending on other people's situations, is used as, unfortunately, a filtering mechanism. Of course, then that is to say that once you do make it above the filter and above a certain threshold of scores, and these scores are going to be different from institution to institution, then what I tell my mentees is that at that point, really, they just want to see, based off of your application and your primary, I guess first your primary application, if they want to meet you. So here's where you can shine in sharing your experiences. I think even though the medical school application process kind of lends itself to almost a checklist of check boxes that you just kind of have to go through and have under your belt, I truly believe that every applicant has a different story to tell, and a different set of skills and strengths that they bring to a table and into a medical school class. And really, at this level, at this stage of the application process, it's that'll be your job to kind of be able to bring that out. And that's something that me and the other coaches here in Inspira try to do. So in terms of kind of these more qualitative characteristics of an applicant, how do you stand out? Right. So how do you stand out when you have kind of the same list of experiences? So the most important thing is depth over quantity. Excuse me. You will have about 12 to 15 slots to enter in your primary application. And sometimes it may feel like it's necessary to fill up all of those slots, but what I tell applicants really to do is to just not feel that pressure of trying to fill every single checkbox, but to just focus on accruing and gobbling up all those volunteer hours or work hours and accruing as many of those as you can. Because really, an applicant who has 4 essentially rock solid involvements, say from high school all the way to application day, will always be seen as more as a stronger applicant than someone who has a smattering of different involvements for just a couple hours here and there. So one of the things that, besides the sheer amount of hours that you can report in your application to kind of show how involved you are in these different extracurricular activities, is to take up leadership positions, and also having your supervisor provide you strong letters of recommendations. These 2 things will telegraph admission committees to essentially say, hey, this person has really taken initiative and worked themselves up to a level where they're able to mentor other students and really spearhead projects within these organizations. And these are all qualities that you want in your future physician, ultimately, right? And so this will kind of trickle down to the next set of bullet points. So this will really show how authentic you are. someone who sticks around for 4 years being involved in something, presumably they'll like being involved in some of those things, versus someone who had just maybe committed for a summer for 3 months or so and then switched to doing something else. That also, all of these involvements are going to be fodder for interview topics too. Usually a good institution will try to pair you with someone who has a similar background. And so I always say that to my mentees that don't put anything into the application where you don't want to be caught talking about that thing to someone who is super, super passionate about whatever you had put down. So for example, if you're not that big of a baseball player, but maybe you play pick up baseball one or two times a couple years, you don't want to necessarily be stuck in an interview with someone who used to play Division I baseball somewhere. So yeah, I would just stick to what you like to do and what you spend most of your time doing, and don't feel pressure to fill up all those boxes for extracurricular activities. The last bullet point here is kind of tangentially related to like being authentic. So the secondaries is essentially a separate application for every medical school. And so what they're looking for is for someone who is passionate about treating patients who they themselves are exposed to within their catchment area. So for example, I can't think of actually at the University of Pittsburgh, when I was there, they had a pretty large homeless population, and organizations that worked towards providing care to a safety net area. And so essentially they were looking for patients who were, or sorry, not patients, they were looking for applicants who were passionate about giving back to the community, passionate about treating patients in an urban area where they can directly affect the patient population and relate to the patient population. This is going to be different than medical schools, say at UC Riverside or University of Virginia, where they interface more with patients from rural areas or areas where maybe care isn't necessarily directly accessible in urban settings, and they may be exposed to different barriers to care. And so these secondaries, you want to make it tailored to every school and telegraph that you know what their identity is and what they're about and their values, and align your own values to what they publish and market.
Amazing. So just before we continue on with the rest of the presentation, I just want to share that for having us here and for spending this hour with us, we wanted to offer everyone in your organization a 10% off any one of our awesome programs with the code 10OFFWEB. And this is just a little bit of a thank you for allowing us to be here in this space and really allowing us to share and educate and provide value. And yeah, we're super excited. So I want to make sure that this organization does know that we're here to support you in any way we can.
Alrighty. Hopefully this is working out great, since this leaves time for about 10 minutes of Q&A, since we had just passed the midline mark. But all right, so academic excellence and intellectual curiosity. So we kind of already talked about the GPA and MCAT score. That will be kind of common filters for medical schools to use to whatever their own needs. Beyond grades and MCAT, how you can kind of show academic excellence and intellectual curiosity is through research. Even though you may not particularly enjoy being in a research lab, pipetting, crunching numbers, etc. I think that being involved in research, or at least, trying research out, especially in the undergrad setting, is really important to being able to adjudicate different medical research findings. Because ultimately, once you do become a doctor, how you keep up with the latest and greatest medical guidelines and treatment paradigms is through reading research articles, figuring out if the cohort that's represented in the research are the same as the type of patients that you're seeing. And so hopefully that motivates all you folks who are not as enthused about research to try it out at the very least. And this will also speak volumes once you do get to the application process. And so, you don't necessarily need to be this person who's publishing papers and saying that they want to obtain a PhD, but scientific research is fundamental to clinical discovery. And so right now, before you start medical school, it's a good space and time to at least try to see if you do like it. And there's also different research projects. It doesn't necessarily have to entail basic science, looking under a microscope and counting cells. That honestly is something that I find truly boring. But the type of research that I personally am interested in is through data science and through clinical outcomes research. And so I think that there's a space of within research that can be exciting to anyone. The hard part is just kind of sifting through these opportunities and finding what you actually like or don't like. Character and commitment to medicine. This is in addition to kind of the leadership positions that you take in your extracurricular activities. These will kind of show more in your personal statement regarding the experiences that you decide to share, and we'll talk about this later. This will also show in your letters of recommendation. In addition to picking your letter writers who know you from kind of like a production standpoint. So either maybe you took that teacher's class and have gotten a good grade, or you worked in this person's research lab, or you accrued so-and-so hours at a volunteer art organization. You do want to pick your letter writers who will provide you a strong letter of recommendation. And so don't be afraid to, when you ask them, to ask them directly, hey, can you provide me a strong letter of recommendation? But you also want to pick someone who knows you personally, someone who knows your personality, your work ethic, what your likes and don't likes. And so that will truly shine through the application process and set you apart from other applicants. Alrighty, so the role of extracurriculars in your application, and this also is relevant to your personal statement. Show, don't just tell. In addition to kind of a resume style boxes where you can put in like the number of hours, the number of money raised, et cetera, the AAMC application will also give you an opportunity to expand on some of your extracurricular activities by like 2,000 characters or so. And so this is an opportunity for you to share specific patient examples or specific experiences that relate to those extracurriculars that has served as your motivation to go into medical school. And really, I think that this is also a good opportunity for you to reflect and also telegraph why you want to specifically become a doctor and not just any other role within the healthcare field. So there's many ways to help people. There's many ways to help people in medicine. For example, you can be a nurse practitioner or physical therapist or occupational therapist, etc. But what you have to clearly telegraph is why you want to specifically become a doctor, and that will come in different ways. Common pitfalls that can weaken an applicant. So applying late. One thing that we didn't necessarily talk about yet is in addition to the application process being 365 days of the year, it's also rolling. But just because it's rolling doesn't mean that you should bank on applying past that June 1st deadline. And so really most applicants who are accepted into medical school will tell you that they applied on the very first day that the applications open. And the reason why is just, unfortunately, the medical school application process is just so competitive that 75% of applications would have been received by the School of Admissions on that very first day. And so any day after that June 1st deadline you're essentially going to be waiting in the back of the line for your application to be reviewed. So what usually happens is on that June 1st opening day, so to speak, the website is going to get so many applications uploaded that the website is going to crash. And then it'll take about 24, 36 hours for it to come back online. And what I tell my mentees is that they literally should just log in and try refreshing the website every so often until it comes back online for them so that they can submit their application on the very first minute that it comes back online. It sounds really, really ridiculous. It's, almost like trying to get concert tickets to a super popular artist that is always sold out. But honestly, that's what it's like. And I wish it's a little bit better, but yeah, this is the type of system that we have now. One thing that I'll say in this bullet point 2 is that this June 1st expectation is also applies to your letter writers. So with that being said, unfortunately, having your letter writers submit their letters of application, their letters of recommendation is something that isn't really out of your control unless you start really, really early. So the rule of thumb that I give my mentees is that you want to give your letter writers at least a month to write the letter of recommendations. And then also give them about 1 to 2 weeks to troubleshoot and account for any technological difficulties. So that means, asking your letter writers really 2 months before everything else is due. And so there's so many things that are going to be due in that June 1st deadline. And so getting organized is going to be a really, really key aspect of finding success in the medical school application process. Weak secondary essays, recycle generic responses, show that you're not really that interested in applying to medical schools, and medical schools will be able to suss that out. Of course, this is going to be tough because of how competitive medical school applications processes are, and you are more likely going to be writing or applying to 35 schools and more. This means, unfortunately, 35 schools and more secondary applications, so one for each school. So this again highlights the importance of being organized. Of course, luckily, some schools are going to overlap in their mission statements and the types of patients they're interested in treating. So in that way, you are able to kind of apply one topic, one talking point from one school to another. But be wary about copy pasting. I've seen, automatic rejections are a copy pasted response saying, "Oh, I would like to apply to School of Medicine A because of this, this, and this," and then submitting that to School of Medicine B, and not realizing that you had just sent your School of Medicine A essay to School of Medicine B. And so that is grounds for automatic rejections and happens more often than people are willing to admit. Overloading activities, we kind of already talked about, it's more important to have quality instead of quantity, and ignoring red flags. So low grades is not a red flag if it's a standalone and it just happens to be, the only time that you were able to, get a C or D or lower. Medical schools are pretty forgiving with that. If you didn't necessarily have a stellar freshman year, but you picked it up after you realized that you wanted to be a doctor, medical schools will like that. And honestly, that was what my own journey looked like. I didn't decide I wanted to be a doctor until maybe my junior year of undergrad. Those things can be overcome, but consistently low grades or consistently kind of like behavior issues that hasn't been addressed, those are going to be strict no-nos for medical schools, and they'll be able to definitely see that during application time. And so besides kind of those pitfalls and the MCAT GPA again, what will truly set you apart is your personal statement, your extracurricular activities, your letters of recommendations, and the maturity and self-reflection that they'll be able to suss out through the overall theme of your application. So in terms of telling a compelling personal stories, I like to tell my mentees to try to have the reader put themselves in your shoes and describe, going back to the show, don't tell, describe kind of your patient encounters or the setting and experiences of what led you to become a doctor in a way that that reader will able to see what you're seeing, smell what you're smelling, breathe the air that you're breathing at the time. And so you want them to kind of be present at that moment of where and why you want to become a doctor. It doesn't necessarily need to be anything extraordinary. Ultimately, I myself wanted to be a doctor because I wanted to help people. But the way and how you tell it and the experiences of how you show it is going to speak volumes than just merely saying, I want to be a doctor because I want to help people. Again, strong letters of recommendation are the best ones are going to come from people who know you well. And this usually means that people who knew you well for a really long time. I know that the biggest challenge for getting a letter of recommendation from your undergrad teachers is that usually you might have a really good undergrad teacher in freshman year, but you don't necessarily need them to write you a letter of recommendation at the end of that year, because you're not going to be applying to medical school 2 or 3 years from then. And also letters of recommendations expire. So the difficult part is going to be keeping touch with your favorite professors, especially with the professors that you've had earlier on in your undergrad career. If it makes things any easier, I will say that, on a personal note, my wife is a professor at a university, and she says that she expects students to ask her for a letter of recommendation. So don't be shy about, kind of keeping in touch with your favorite professors, or don't be shy about asking them for a letter of recommendation when the time comes to ask them for a letter of recommendation. At least, for my wife, she doesn't mind, and all of our colleagues expect to write letters of recommendation. So they know that it's part of the process. And yeah, it might feel a little kind of uncomfortable to keep in touch with your professors from years and years, but if you're a really good student in that class, your professors will be really happy to hear from you and hear what you've been up to. So one of the, I think, disheartening things, especially from my standpoint of mentoring other students as well and writing letters of recommendations for them, is that they don't keep me updated on where they end up going. If you are fortunate to get into medical school or win that award that you needed their support for, it's nice to kind of close the loop and let them know how things are going. And I'm sure they'll be more than ecstatic to hear back from you. And then maturity and self-reflection. This is going to be, this is really going to show from your personal statement and extracurriculars and the types of experiences you decide to share. If you tell them that medical school, the reason why you want to become a doctor is to make a lot of money, that's probably not the best motivation to go into medical school, because I'll tell you that once you are able to matriculate into medical school, you're going to be in negative money because of how much it costs. And so, there's way better things than being a doctor if your sole goal in life is to make a lot of money. So steps to a strong personal statement: find your core message. Think about the experiences that you're going to talk about. Essentially, don't stress out too much in finding, quote unquote, finding your identity. These will all be, I think, secondary to what you decide to put on paper, because in the end, the reason why those experiences come to mind for you is there's going to be a general theme. And that's something that I help my mentees in. And it will come organically and naturally. So don't stress out with thinking, oh, what am I, going to write about, and how do I define myself and make myself stand out to from other applicants. Just think about the experiences that have been really meaningful in your journey so far. Write about that, and eventually, through the iterative process of writing your personal statement, it's gonna come naturally. Show, don't just tell. That's we kind of already talked about that. And 3 is one of the most important parts of your personal statement and also your extracurriculars. Seek feedback from many different types of readers: your parents, your teachers, your research coordinator, your research supervisors. Every person is going to read your personal statement in a different way. And the medical school selection process is made up of folks from from very diverse backgrounds, not just doctors. So they're filled with staff, researchers, along with physicians. But your personal statement, the more that it can be relatable to many different people is going to be a plus. So don't be shy with seeking that feedback from other people. After the primary application and the secondary application, you'll go into your interviews. And for here, depending on where you are on your personality, some mentees can have issues with being more confident in their application, and some mentees can be the opposite, where they're too arrogant. So it's kind of a tightrope that you have to balance. And this is where kind of like the fun part of me being a counselor and coach to some of my mentees is kind of like having them thread that needle. It could be difficult, but in the end, once I have a mentee that gets to this process, really what I tell them is they just honestly want to get to know you as a person. They want to know if they can hang out with you outside of the professional world and have a nice meal or have a casual conversation with. And so, don't stress out in having to puff out your chest and kind of feel like you have to show them why you deserve to matriculate into medical school. Just treat them as like getting to know a potential friend for the future, because that's ultimately what they're trying to assess. And they're trying to assess, hey, would I have this medical student treat the patients would I trust this medical student to treat the patients that I see from the day to day? Handling tough interview questions. So there's going to be 2 types of interview styles. The one type is going to be the standard one-on-one. I introduce myself and ask you some questions about why you want to go into medicine and other things. The other type of interview style is called a MMI, or multiple mini interviews, where you are set up to interview with more than one person. It's usually about 6 to 7 stations. This can vary from a one-on-one interview to a panel of interviewers interviewing you. And it can also vary in that you may be interviewing with other people in the same room, and other applicants in the same room. They might present you with ethical questions and ethical scenarios of, hey, here's you only have one liver transplant to give. Would you give it to person A versus person B? Person A has so, person B has so-and-so. Tell me your reasoning for one or the other. Or it could be also like curveball questions of, hey, teach me something, which I've gotten that before. So where you have to pick a topic from your, preferably from your extracurriculars, where you teach the other person something, to just the run-of-the-mill interview question. So tell me about your weakness. What I have here is, the tell me about your weakness question is, the best way to answer that question is to talk about your weakness, but also frame it in how you've improved and potentially have converted that into a strength. So that's usually the best method. You don't want to just end it on kind of like a sour note of, this is my weakness and I haven't really I've been stuck in a rut and haven't been able to kind of dig myself out of that hole. So don't kind of pigeonhole yourself into that type of thinking. So final steps before submission. This is probably before the interview phase, but double check your mistakes. Sometimes the application will be prepped in a Word document, and what you have to do is copy and paste things into the boxes of the application portal. Sometimes the copy and paste function, it's great for efficiency, but it might also lead to technological mishaps. So try to give yourself ample time to be able to review your documents before you clicking that submit button. Timing your submission, again, early on June 1st, you want to be able to experience the website crashing on you. Once the website crashes, keep refreshing so that you can try to submit your application the second that it comes back online. All righty.
So before we hop into the Q&A, we'd love to hear from you. As you can see, we're asking for your feedback. It's a really quick survey. I think it's 3 or 4 questions, and it really allows us to take the information back, take it to our team, see how we can improve our process, offer better guidance, and obviously improve future sessions. We want to make sure that we are providing students with as much value as possible and with information that really matters to them. So if you could, we'd really appreciate it. You will receive a link to this feedback survey as well. So Bima, we have a ton of questions in the chat. I want to jump right in. First question, do you have to get published to count as research?
No, yeah, that is not necessarily, you don't have to be like a co-author on a research project or anything like that. I mean, it's definitely a plus because then it shows that you've taken leadership and also contributed enough to kind of the scientific framework of the paper to be considered as a co-author. So it's definitely a plus, and that's the standard that you should aim for. But I would say secondary to that is any opportunities to present your poster or research at local or national conferences counts as well. But also, being involved in the research lab and carrying experiments in the day-to-day, even if you don't have something specific at the very end to contribute to, will also count. So I would definitely count that as research.
Amazing. Hopefully that helps. Next question. While constructing personal statements, what advice would you give to students struggling to find a topic? That's a really great question.
Yeah, definitely. That sometimes the best ideas will come when you're doing something else. So like when you're working out or going on a long run or something, or doing chores around the house. Honestly, the best advice that I have for that is just to start thinking about that early, because the more time you think about it, the more ideas is going to come.
So I'd love to just piggyback off of that. And it wasn't asked by this particular audience, but I think it's always very helpful. What is the best way to begin brainstorming? So is it, what is the sort of if you, I know we only have a few minutes left and we have a few more questions, but just sort of a high level example of how to start like how to actually start thinking about it. What kind of thoughts, what kind of discussions should you be having with yourself?
Yeah. Let's see. From a practical point of view, since the application process starts the application opens and is available to submit June 1st, I recommend my mentees to start thinking about it in February. Even before that, so 4 months before, even before that, when they do their volunteer experiences or work experiences, etc., I try to have them have a little notebook that they can keep, where they can jot down interesting clinical experiences they've seen. And really, once you get to that personal statement phase, the general prompt that is asked year after year is, so why medicine? Why do you want to be a doctor? And what I tell them to do is just go back to that notebook and just start writing. Like the worst thing about writing a personal statement is just being paralyzed with knowing what to write. I just tell them that just pretend like no one is judging you. Just write just to write. Don't let your fingers stop typing. Most of my first drafts for research articles and my own personal statements look like word vomit the first couple of drafts anyway. And don't make that don't let that intimidate you from just putting things down on paper, because once you have things down on paper, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of shape and form and reframe things the way you want it to end.
Thank you for that. Okay, we have a few more questions. If someone is taking a gap year, do you recommend that they use it for growth in hours, trying different curricular activities, continuing some sort of education / research, working clinical hours, or a mix?
Yeah, a good question. I would say definitely a mix would be best, because technically now, if you think of your undergrad as more than a 40-hour work week, then you have, with those gap years, you have a boost in 40 hours, at least a week, to explore and kind of find what you're interested in within medicine. So for me, I actually recommend my mentees to take gap years, because that's the norm now. When I was in medical school, so like 8 years ago, a long time ago now, the average age was 24, which means that most people took 2 years of a gap between undergrad and medical school. The amount of people from a class of 104 that went straight from undergrad to medical school was only 4. So less than 4% of our class went straight through. So I think the best thing about taking a gap year is you're able to relate to patients when you see them in clinic, and you'll be able to understand, what it's like to be living with a full-time job and have to juggle all of these other commitments in addition to keeping up with your health. So a mix and a breadth, but also keep in mind quality over quantity would be the best way to spend that time.
Amazing. So we're right on the hour, but I think we can do one more question if that's okay. So when preparing for medical school applications, how would you recommend keeping track of everything?
Yeah, and this can get really hairy really fast if you have multiple versions of things. For one, I would familiarize yourself now with working with a cloud-based storage device, because I think like my own personal laptop has crashed like 2 times in my undergrad, in my time as an undergrad. And so it would be really unfortunate to have it only in your local computer. So you want to have it backed up somewhere in the cloud. And so other than that, in terms of multiple versions of the personal statements and the extracurriculars you're going to write, I would date everything by the year, the month, and then the day. So then that way, when you save everything in your folders, it will organize itself in chronological order. And so that way, if you want to work on your most recent draft, just go all the way to the bottom of the list and click that document. But if you, as you start writing, you then remember, oh, wait, I actually had written about this before that someone else had told me to delete, or maybe you thought that it was irrelevant at the time, but now it can be useful. Then you can go back to that folder and go to where you think that version of the draft has, and then open that and copy and paste what you need to the current draft. And so that's kind of the strategy that I've found useful in a nutshell, is to kind of organize everything based off of a cloud, and also organize it based off of the file name that you decide to name it, with the strategy in mind of keeping it organized.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. I think that's one of those questions that we get every single time we do this. So incredible question and incredible response. We are out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Again, thank you so much for having us. Bima, thank you for sharing your input. Jalen, thank you for putting this together. And as mentioned, we do offer free consultations, but equally so, you have our email. So if you have any sort of questions, comments, concerns, if you'd like to follow up with anything, or you want to hear a little bit more, or maybe pick our brains, please don't hesitate to reach out. We want to make sure that we can support you in any way possible going forward. Awesome. I hope everyone has a good night.